I force the swollen front door open, and the winter wind rushes past me, scattering the stack of unopened mail across the hardwood floor. Bills, condolence cards still sealed. Grocery store coupons, all of it slides and spins across the entryway in a chaos I can't control. The cold bites at my face, sharp enough to make my eyes water. Or maybe that's something else entirely. I don't know anymore. A framed photo of my husband, still hanging in the entryway, tilts from the sudden gust. I watch it happen in slow motion, the frame rocking once, twice, then breaking free from its nail. It crashes to the ground with a sound that seems loud for such a small object, glass shattering outward in jagged pieces that catch the gray afternoon light. I kneel without thinking, my knees hitting the cold floor harder than I intended. My hand reaches out, hovering just inches above the broken frame, trembling in the space between wanting to touch it and being unable to. His face stares up at me through the splintered glass, that smile I knew better than my own. Frozen in a moment when everything still made sense. My fingers curl into my palm, nails pressing crescents into skin. The house seems to exhale around me, a slow release of stale air that smells like dust and abandonment. The thermostat hasn't been adjusted in months. The curtains remain drawn. Every surface carries a thin layer of neglect, as if the house itself has been holding its breath, waiting to see what breaks first, the room or me. I pull my hand back, wrapping my arms around myself against the cold still pouring through the open door. The wind moves through the empty rooms behind me, stirring things I can't see, whispering through spaces that once held laughter and arguments, and the mundane comfort of someone else breathing nearby. Now there's only this me, kneeling on a floor covered in shattered glass and scattered paper, unable to pick up the one thing I came back here to face. Before I tell you what happened in this house, please subscribe to Paws That Healed, and tell me in the comments if you've ever returned to a place filled with memories you weren't ready to face. And standing there on that cold floor, surrounded by silence and broken glass, I finally said my own name out loud, as if to remind myself I was still here. My name is Lauren Whitaker, and this is a house I once shared with my husband here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I speak the words into the emptiness, listening to how differently my voice sounds now. It echoes slightly in the hollow rooms, unfamiliar and small, like hearing a recording of yourself and not quite recognizing what comes back. The house doesn't respond. It just sits here, full of furniture we picked out together, walls we painted on a summer weekend, floors that still creak in all the same places. But saying my name didn't bring me back, it only reminded me of how much of me disappeared. The day he did. This house was where he cooked Sunday breakfasts, filling the kitchen with the smell of coffee and burning toast, because he always got distracted reading articles on his phone. It was where we argued over nothing, whose turn it was to take out the trash, whether we needed new curtains, what to watch on Thursday nights. It was where we planned a future that never arrived, talking about renovations and vacations and all the ordinary years we thought we'd have. Coming back wasn't a choice, it was the last place I had left after losing him, then losing my job, then losing the ability to pretend I was okay. The apartment I'd been staying in belonged to a friend who needed it back. My sister stopped calling as often, exhausted by my inability to move forward. Even my own reflection had become something I avoided, tired of seeing the hollowed-out version of who I used to be. So I came back here to the house that still had my name on the deed but no longer felt like mine. The first night, I slept on the couch because I couldn't face the bedroom. The second night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the kitchen with all the lights off, watching the digital clock on the microwave count forward while everything else in my life felt like it was counting down. The silence was so complete it had weight, pressing against my eardrums, filling my chest until breathing felt like work. Nights were the worst. The walls seemed to press in, replaying moments I wasn't ready to relive, his laugh echoing from the living room, the sound of his keys in the door, the way he called my name from upstairs. The silence grew heavier than anything I could lift, thick and suffocating, turning the house into a museum of everything I'd lost. On the third night, when the grief felt sharp enough to cut through bone, I heard a sound I wasn't expecting, something moving outside. It was nearly midnight when I opened the back door, following the soft rustle near the shed. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, when I heard a gentle scratching, the quiet shuffle of something moving through the snow-covered yard. At first, I thought it was the wind disturbing the tarp over the grill, or maybe a branch scraping against the fence. But then I heard it again, more deliberate this time, accompanied by a soft whimper that cut through the winter stillness. I grabbed the flashlight from the junk drawer, batteries half dead, beam flickering, and stepped out onto the back porch. The cold hit me immediately. That dry Colorado cold that steals the moisture from your lungs. My breath clouded in front of me as I swept the weak light across the yard, catching the bare branches of the elm tree, the forgotten lawn furniture buried in snow, the dark outline of the shed. And then I saw him. A small, mud-covered dog stood there, maybe 20 feet away, ribs faintly visible beneath matted fur. His coat might have been brown once, or tan, but now it was just the color of dirt and survival. His tail hung low but not quite between his legs, cautious, but not defeated. What struck me most were his eyes, catching the flashlight beam and holding it, staring at me like he had been waiting for someone, maybe anyone, to open that door. He didn't bark, didn't rush forward or run away. He just stood there in the snow, shivering slightly, watching me with an expression I recognized because I'd seen it in my own reflection. The look of someone who'd been alone too long, and wasn't sure if reaching out would make things better or worse. I stepped down off the porch, my slippers soaking through immediately in the snow. "Hey," I whispered, my voice rough and disuse. "It's okay." He tilted his head slightly, ears perking up at the sound of a human voice. I moved closer, slowly, the way you approach something fragile that might break or bolt. When I was close enough to crouch down, I could see the worn leather collar around his neck, hanging loose like he'd lost weight since someone buckled it on. His tag was worn and scratched, the metal dulled by time and weather, but one name was still clear: Charlie. "Charlie," I repeated, and his tail lifted slightly, just the smallest movement of recognition or hope. I reached out my hand, letting him sniff my fingers. His nose was cold and wet, his breath warm against my palm. For a long moment, we just stayed like that, me crouched in the snow, him standing uncertain in the darkness, both of us trying to decide if trust was still possible. He took a single cautious step toward me, and something in my chest shifted with him. I let him inside just for the night, telling myself it was temporary. But he curled at my feet like he already belonged. I found an old towel and dried him off as best I could, the fabric turning brown with mud and melted snow. He stood patiently through it, not pulling away. His body relaxed under my hands in a way that suggested he'd known kindness before. When I filled a bowl with water, he drank like he'd been searching for it for days, then looked up at me with drops still clinging to his whiskers. I made a bed for him out of blankets near the heating vent, but within an hour, he relocated to the spot beside the couch where I was lying, unable to sleep but too tired to move. He circled twice, then settled with a soft sigh, his back pressed against the couch's base, his presence solid and warm in the cold room. When I cried quietly into my sleeves, the kind of crying I'd gotten good at, almost silent, just tears and shaking shoulders, he lifted his head and pressed it against my knee. Not asking for anything, not seeking comfort for himself, just being there. His weight was slight but real, a small anchor in the drift of my grief. The next morning, I opened the curtains for the first time since returning. Sunlight poured in, harsh and revealing, showing every dust mote floating in the stale air, every surface I'd been avoiding. Charlie blinked up at the light streaming across the floor, then looked at me as if inviting me to do the same, to stop hiding in the darkness. I'd wrapped around myself, and for the first time in months, I didn't turn away from the light. Days began falling into soft, unplanned routines. His slow steps followed me as I moved from room to room. A gentle presence that never demanded, but always offered. I'd hear the soft click of his nails on the hardwood behind me when I went to make coffee. The rustle of him adjusting his position when I sat down. The rhythmic sounds of his breathing at night that reminded me I wasn't completely alone. I found myself talking to him, not full sentences at first, just fragments of the grief I didn't know how to name. "I miss him," I'd say to the empty kitchen, and Charlie would be there listening. "I don't know how to do this," I'd whisper in the dark, and his tail would thump once against the floor, a small acknowledgement that he heard. He listened as if every broken piece of me was something worth keeping. We started taking cautious walks through the snowy yard. At first, just to the fence line and back, my body weak from months of barely eating, barely moving, barely existing. Charlie would pause when I needed to catch my breath, waiting without judgment, then continue on when I was ready. The cold air hurt my lungs in a way that felt clarifying, like remembering my body was still capable of feeling something other than pain. One morning, I realized I'd gotten dressed in real clothes instead of the same sweatpants I'd been wearing for days. It wasn't a conscious decision, I just found myself reaching for jeans, a clean sweater, as if Charlie's presence required me to meet him halfway in his patient belief that things could be normal again. I started keeping food in the house, not just for him but for me too. Simple things: bread, eggs, soup. I'd make breakfast and find myself setting two bowls on the floor, one with water, one with kibble I'd bought at the small grocery store down the street. The act of feeding something other than my grief felt like a muscle I was learning to use again. The house began to shift around us, not in any dramatic way, but in small increments of life returning. I washed the dishes that had been piling up. I picked up the mail from where it had scattered that first day. I swept the broken glass from the entryway, though I still couldn't bring myself to rehang the photo. Charlie would settle near, wherever I was working, his presence undemanding but constant. Sometimes I'd look up from whatever task I was attempting and find him watching me, his brown eyes patient and knowing, as if he understood that healing wasn't linear. That some days I'd move forward and other days I'd barely move at all. On the evenings when the grief came back in waves, and it always did, he pressed himself against my legs while I stood at the kitchen window, staring out at nothing. His warmth seeped through my jeans, grounding me when my thoughts spiraled toward dark places I'd learned to avoid. I started noticing things I'd stopped seeing: the way morning light hit the living room wall, the sound of birds returning as winter began to loosen its grip, the smell of coffee that didn't make me ache with loneliness anymore. These tiny observations felt revolutionary, like reclaiming small pieces of myself I thought were lost forever. And one morning, he did something so simple, it changed everything. I found him sitting by the front door, head resting against the same broken frame of my husband's photo, the one I hadn't been able to touch. The frame was still on the floor where it had fallen that first day, pushed against the wall where I'd nudged it with my foot, unable to pick it up but unwilling to leave it in the middle of the floor. I'd been walking past it for days, averting my eyes, pretending it wasn't there. But Charlie had found it. He sat beside it, calm and still, his head resting gently against the wood frame as if keeping it company. When he heard my footsteps, he looked back at me with those patient brown eyes, then nudged the picture toward my hands with his nose, a gentle push, nothing forceful, just an invitation. I knelt down slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Charlie stepped back slightly, giving me space but not leaving. My hands, which had trembled so badly that first day, reached out and lifted the frame from the floor. For the first time, I picked it up without shaking. The glass was still broken, cracks webbing across my husband's smile, but I could see him clearly. That photo was from our anniversary 2 years ago, taken at the restaurant where he proposed, both of us laughing at something the waiter had said. His eyes were crinkled at the corners the way they always were when he really laughed. Not the polite chuckle he gave to bad jokes, but the real thing, the sound I'd replayed in my head so many times it had started to feel like fiction. "David," I whispered, his name leaving my lips for the first time since coming back to this house. And when I said it, my voice didn't break, it softened. It felt like the moment I could finally breathe without collapsing. Like my lungs were remembering how to expand fully instead of taking those shallow, careful breaths I'd been surviving on. Charlie moved closer, pressing his side against my leg, and I let one hand drop to rest on his head while the other held the frame. "Thank you," I said quietly. Not sure if I was talking to David or to Charlie or to some version of myself that was still fighting to stay afloat. A few days later, the sun rose warm against the frosted backyard, and Charlie nudged me toward the open door as if saying it was time. We stepped outside together, the cold air filling our lungs, crystalline and sharp. The sky stretched wide above the pines that lined the back fence. That impossibly bright Colorado blue that makes you squint even as you can't look away. The snow had started to melt in patches, revealing the brown grass underneath, the early signs of spring pushing through. Charlie walked a few steps ahead, then looked back at me, waiting. We made our way across the yard past the shed where I'd first found him, toward the fence line, where the property opened up to the view of Pikes Peak in the distance. The mountain stood solid and unchanging, covered in snow that would last well into summer. A reminder that some things endure. The house behind me no longer felt like a tomb, just a place holding memories I didn't need to run from anymore. It was still filled with David's things, with our shared history, with the life we built and lost. But standing there in the morning light, with Charlie at my side, I understood that those memories didn't have to be prisons. They could just be what they were, pieces of a life that mattered, that still mattered, even if it looked completely different now. Charlie sat down in the snow beside me, his shoulder brushing my leg, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. We stayed like that for a while, watching the light change on the mountain, feeling the sun slowly warm our faces. It wasn't healing, not completely, not yet. But it was a beginning, the first morning I'd welcomed instead of endured. If Charlie's story touched you, please subscribe to Paws That Healed and share your own story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. I thought I was saving him, but he saved me.